Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, we're going to react to Is the USA Safer Than the UK? An Honest American Opinion. So this is from a lady, I believe her name is, I can't remember, but she lives in the UK now, but she's born and raised in America. So she's going to touch on, the various sort of safety aspects, whether it's, pew-pews, police, general sort of public interactions that people have, the differences between England and America. It's hard because unless you've lived in every single state in America, you're going to be sort of biased to whichever state you lived in. And there's going to be certain states that are safer than others. Just like in England, certain cities will be safer than others as well. But we'll get a good gauge.
But again, most of the crime in the UK is crime that doesn't require any sort of firearm in order to handle. That is a very US sensibility. It took me maybe 10 minutes because I had to park, do a 3-point turn, and kind of just show that I was alive and at the steering wheel.
Straight into the heavy stuff, huh?
Hey guys, welcome back to the Girl Gone London channel. If you're new here, my name is Kaylin. I'm an American who's lived in the UK for almost 10 years, and today I'm answering the question of, do I feel safer in the US or the UK? Now, safety is a huge issue that people often kind of look up, whether you're moving somewhere, whether you're visiting somewhere. How safe do people feel? How safe will I be? And I do want to say that this video is not filled with statistics. This is my personal experience, and so that means that it is
anecdotal
from an experience of somebody of my race, my gender, and my age, which is
a fair point that she's making, because obviously someone of maybe they're a minority might have a slightly different experience. So good that she kind of addressed that.
In my late 20s. If you have different experiences, definitely comment below and let me know. I can only compare what I have experienced, which is again why I'm not trying to claim that this is a video about everybody's experiences of safety in either country. These are just more categories that I feel I can talk about and whether it makes me feel safe or not. So the first thing I want to talk about, and I've kind of come up with a few different categories again to compare the countries and my experiences in the countries. The first one, which is more London centric, is CCTV, which is basically security cameras or security footage. London is one of the most CCTV filled cities in the entire world. I think it ranks 3 or 4. It's definitely up there, and definitely no American city compares. This is really well known about London. There is controversy of whether it should be filled with so much CCTV, tracking everybody's every move. For me, I feel like this gives me a level of safety.
Yeah, for me personally, unless you're up to no good, why would you be against having security cameras? Because God forbid, if something were to happen to you, if there's a camera and there's a camera, that's evidence for you to then use in court against who you're going after, right? So for me, why would you be against it? But then again, I'm not a criminal, so maybe, I don't know, there could be other reasons that I'm not considering.
In London, that I do feel things are being watched. If a crime were to occur, that hopefully it would be caught on some sort of CCTV footage. And again, I'm only talking about London on this one, and I am not talking about the rest of the UK, but in general, London, it is worth pointing out, first of all, is a really safe city statistically anyway, but there's a lot of CCTV and that makes me feel more comfortable. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is actually going away from cities or rural and taking it to the road. So let's talk about, safety on the road. I think this is something that a lot of people overlook, but I kind of wanted to include it because it is part of why I ultimately feel safer in one country over the other. So here in the UK, they have what's called an MOT.
Yes.
This means that your car needs to be tested by a mechanic or a garage, a licensed one, every single year to make sure that it is roadworthy. Now, when they're doing this check, they're not necessarily checking for cosmetic things or things that
main structural, engine, lights, main stuff
that would affect how the car runs or how it performs for you. They're testing whether this car is roadworthy and safe to be on the road. Makes sense. When you compare this to the state that I'm most familiar with, which is Florida in the US, we don't have anything like this. We used to have vehicle inspections, I think, back in the day, but it hasn't been a thing for like 20 years. So you can basically drive whatever car you want at whatever time, in whatever situation it's in, on the road. I didn't even realize this is something to be nervous about until my British husband brought this up. Like,
yeah, what if you're driving on the highway and you have a brake failure? Jesus, man. Yeah, come on, Florida, come on, man, get some MOT.
Don't you feel kind of uncomfortable that like the guy behind you could have a car that's about to explode? And I hadn't really thought of it before, but now that I do know about MOTs and I have lived in the UK, I can say that when it comes to roadworthiness of the cars driving around me, I definitely prefer the UK. The other thing to mention, and I am going to do a video on driving in the UK versus the US, but I can tell you that the driving test in the UK is like an actual driving test that takes about an hour, and you really got to know your stuff to pass. They take you on the actual roads. In Florida, again, the state I'm most familiar with, which is why I cannot compare to other states, so comment below if your state is different. But in Florida, when I passed my driving test, we definitely went in a parking lot. I think we went like on a really slow neighborhood back road for like 20 miles an hour, and it took me maybe 10 minutes because I had to like park,
10 minutes,
do a 3-point turn, and kind of just show that I was like alive and at the steering wheel. And so when I compare that to the driving test that people in the UK have to go through to pass, I would say I probably feel safer with UK drivers on the road. That doesn't mean that everyone here is a good driver. It doesn't mean that everyone in the US is a bad driver, or that I just feel unsafe there. I'm not saying I feel unsafe in the US on the road. I'm just saying if I have to make a comparison and make a judgment on which country I feel safer in, it would be the UK.
Americans watching this, do you think where you live, the standard of driving is good? Like, how often when you're on the road do you think, or do you find yourself in a situation where there's a driver that you just think, what the hell are you doing? Like, you know, you're going to unalive somebody. Like, does that happen often? Like, how often does that happen? Do you think that?
Now, the next topic to get into is probably the one you clicked on this video for, and that has to do with guns. So guns are not legal in the UK except for very, very specific instances. These relate to like farmers needing them for their livestock. I think there are a couple other things related to like sporting guns or sporting rifles. But in terms of handguns, semi-automatic guns, things like that, not allowed, not okay, and not part of the culture here that people care about having guns. Obviously,
although they are starting to find their way into the UK, some say from Eastern Europe. The gun crime is unfortunately on the increase here in the UK. Still nowhere near, you know, other countries.
Being from the US, I can speak to this. We do have a gun culture. You will probably experience my opinions about guns as I get through this comparison, but we definitely live in a society that makes it so much easier to own a gun, whether it's for hunting, your safety, personal safety, or whatever you feel like it's for. Compared to the UK, there's no gun culture here. They are not allowed. And obviously that makes me feel pretty safe. I enjoy going to the shopping mall, the movie theater, or whatever, and not fearing that some, mass gun violence is going to occur. They did have some instances here in the UK. A particular one is called Dunblane, a really tragic incident that changed a lot of their gun laws. Not that they were like America before, but definitely made it so that the British public got behind this idea of guns not being allowed, not being okay, not being something that people needed. And it's just such a different culture and atmosphere surrounding firearms than exists in the US. And again, I know that there are very specific instances where they are allowed here. And I'm sure that some criminals do have access to them or could get them illegally, but it is much, much, much more difficult. So in that sense, again, I would much prefer to live in the UK if you are comparing on that topic. I feel much more secure. There are other types of crimes. There are things like knife crimes, but nothing that would really allow a sort of mass crime or mass casualty event like we really sadly experience in the US.
Yeah, that's the main sort of thing that I have in my head. Like a crazy person with a knife, like, yeah, they can cause some damage, but it's way less than somebody with like a, semi-auto, or a machine gun or whatever, like even a pistol. That's the main thing. That's the main sort of issue I have. Like, because unfortunately, even though most people are of sound mind, would never dream of doing something crazy, like that one nutcase, if God forbid you find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time, within a minute or so, they could do so much damage.
Now, on the topic of firearms, did you know that most UK police officers are not even armed with a gun? They are armed with like a taser, or they might have some other kind of lesser weapons, but the society isn't armed, and most of the police officers aren't either. Now, people often ask me if this makes me feel unsafe. And first of all, I would say that there always is kind of a part of me that has grown up being fearful of gun violence and gun incidents. And so occasionally I do wonder, like how long would it take for the police officers who do have guns to arrive at the scene if some crime were to happen. But again, most of the crime in the UK is crime that doesn't require any sort of firearm in order to handle. That is a very US sensibility. There is a real atmosphere here of policing not by force. Whereas I think in the US, we have more of a police by force culture.
Which is understandable. If I was a police officer in America and I knew that every time I get called out to some kind of disturbance, there could be somebody there with a pew-pew, with a gun, I would be super on edge. I would want to get the person, in cuffs as quickly as possible. It automatically would put me really tense. So I get the American police sort of mindset. I can understand why they do what they do.
Which is a whole nother topic, but here in the UK, police officers are definitely seen in a different light than in the US. They're not really people to be scared of. I would say most people sometimes maybe go the opposite direction and definitely aren't scared of them enough. But there is not a culture of policing by force or by firearms here. I did mention, and I do want to point out, that some police officers, and I don't know, comment below if you can tell me like which ones are specifically licensed or if they're called something different, but some police officers and some units are licensed to use firearms.
Yeah, armed police. It's the armed units.
And do carry them in the UK. So it's not that like no police officer has access to one. It's just that the ones that you'll usually pass, like walking down the street, probably don't. But there are armed police officers, and often I see them at train stations and in other crowded areas, which always makes me feel a bit safer. They can be called into an incident, like I said. But if you're a Brit, comment below, let me know more on that. Like I said, this is a video of my personal experiences, not a deep dive into the safety or statistics of both places. I just know that in general, most British police officers do not carry guns, and guns are not allowed in the UK in most instances. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is personal safety. And I try to think of a way to compare this. It's so difficult because it's so hard to compare like a village in Southeast England with New York City or the suburbs of Florida with London. So it's really, really hard, I think, to say, do I personally feel safer just like on a daily basis walking around in the US or the UK? But if I do have to compare, and I'm going to go ahead and compare London to cities that I've been in the US, places like New York City. I lived in Pittsburgh for a while for my undergraduate degree, which I really loved. But I would say that I have felt personally safer in London. And London by itself, just without any kind of comparison, like I said, is a really safe city.
Any Americans watching this, or Canadians, or other nationalities, if you've been to the UK, did you feel like London was a safe city compared to your home city? Like, how would you compare the two in terms of just how safe you felt?
The crime rates, I think, are much lower than a lot of major cities, and a lot of people have their own problems with London. But for me, as a single woman who, well, I'm not a single woman now, but like if I'm walking around by myself, if I'd stayed late for drinks after work or something like that, I have never been in a situation in London where I felt unsafe or threatened. Obviously, you do have to have street smarts. Don't be walking by yourself at 3 a.m. in a dark alley. Don't be walking down a dark alley anyway. But in general, when it came to my feeling of safety in London versus my feeling of safety in other places that I've been in the US, I'm going to go ahead and have to give the personal safety feeling award to London. And that basically means that every single category I've come up with, road safety, physical safety, guns versus no guns, police officers and things like that, I pretty much answered that I feel safer in the UK. And I want to point out some things. Number one, that isn't to say that I ever felt unsafe
in America,
in the US, or that I've been in a situation in like a US city where I was walking around and felt threatened or unsafe. It's not that when I go back to the US and I'm driving, I look at every car around me wondering if it's roadworthy. So this is really me having to make a decision in order to film this video and to really have an opinion on it. It's not that I feel like the US is incredibly...
I feel like she's saying this because she knows she's going to get some comments in there like, what are you talking about?
Dangerous from a personal day-to-day life perspective. That being said, when it does come to gun violence, obviously the US is off the charts, much more dangerous. And also I do want to acknowledge that, again, this is based on my experience, based on my race, gender, and age. And I know that different people will have different experiences. And
Right. Yeah, like, you know, obviously her opinions are her own and not everybody will share those. You know, if I was to find a minority, maybe someone who looked like me, and asked them to provide their own opinions, you know, on the questions she answered, maybe their opinions might be different, maybe they'd be similar. I don't know, but yeah, very interesting topics. I do think ultimately, you know, a place where there are more guns around, there will be more gun crime. Like, I just think that's a quite logical train of thought to follow. That isn't to say that guns should be abolished. That's just me making a fairly sort of common sense statement. Like, let me know if you disagree with that. But yeah, like each country's different. Each country's got its own quirks, you know, their own cultures. But I do think that, you know, Florida and America as a whole should implement some kind of MOT, man. It's just, it makes sense. So every year you pay about £60, you take your car to the mechanic, he gives your car a once over, it takes about an hour or two, and they just make sure that, you know, the brakes are working, the engine's fine, you know, the timing belt's okay, it's not going to snap in half. I just think it makes sense. What do you think? Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next